Hey, I'm back. I know it's been a while since since I made a video, um, but I felt like maybe I was putting too much stuff out there too quickly, so I pulled it back a little bit to give you a chance to catch up on things. Plus, I have to remember that you guys actually have other classes going on, you have lives going on. You are going through this just as much as I am. So I thought I would try to reshape things. So going forward, we are going to change the way that I do things, the way that this will be structured. So instead of having a video every single day, we are going to do a video on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So there'll be just 3 videos per week. So then in between, you have a chance to kind of digest the things that we've been talking about and also to continue working on things that are for our class. Um, I want to just explain a few things to you. Some of you are doing really well, um, giving me things. Some of you not so well. That needs to change. That needs to. I would encourage you to don't think of this as a prolonged vacation. This is still we're still in school, and you are still expected to be doing stuff. Um, so for this unit, we're in unit 3. What we are going to be doing this unit, things that you're going to be responsible for. We're not doing a film study, so we won't be doing that. So if you're looking on your grades, the film study we won't be doing that. The quiz is still valid, and all of them are. You can do them whenever you feel confident. You have an unlimited amount of times to do them, so just please start doing them. We are going to do a project. We will do it soon. Not sure when, but well, when I figure it out, we'll get to it. We will do a written assignment, but it won't be the way that we did it in class, where you can't have resources. Obviously, you're gonna be writing it at home, so you will have access to resources. So that means that you'll be using whatever you can to write it. Um, uh, when we get closer to the day we're gonna do that, I'll structure it in that way. We are still going to do the test. The test will be the same thing, kind of like what you did for Unit 2. Some of you have finished it, and that's great, and I marked it. And I've also put in comments in red. Um, uh, in red. Although one of you actually wrote in red, so I had to change it to blue. It's cool, though. So if you haven't done the test yet, I do it. No, I'm not going to strongly encourage you. It is you must do this. And then the booklet and the dictionary. Those are still fair game. So really, it's business as usual minus the film study. For those of you that are really on top of things, fantastic. Keep doing what you're doing. For those of you that have not been doing so great, now's your time to change. Because I do see when you go onto our D2L, I see when the last time you were logged in. Some of you, it would have been like yesterday, or if it was yesterday, it was the day before. So you're doing a really good job. Some of you, not so much. And it will have to be helping you out to get back on track. So that is how things are going to look for the rest of this unit, and then for the last unit, we're going to do the exact same thing. So today I'm making a video. Monday I will make a video, and then we'll go from there. Yeah, and then let's not forget there's also spring break coming up. I believe next week spring break. I'm obviously not making any video spring break. That is your time to relax. You probably won't be doing very much in terms of travel, but going out for walks is nice. If it wasn't always snowing, we'd probably doing a lot. We would probably be doing a lot more of that. But it is what it is sometimes, so we'll just have to go with that. But that's enough of an introduction. If you have any questions, please email me. Some of you have been emailing me, which is great. Continue to do so. And yeah, and I will answer your questions as best I can. So, we left off a week ago. We're still in Unit 3. Now we're on Student Activity 21. So this is page 10 in your work booklet. Last video was a very long video, and we talked about a lot of things. We went through a lot of periods in history. We went through the First World War, the Great Depression, the Second World War, and we sort of introduced the Cold War. Um, so really, we went through the 20th century in a nutshell. So if you haven't watched it or if you need to rewatch it, please do. It is a very lengthy video though. It's like 45 minutes, but it is full of rich content. This video this lecture starts with a 4-minute video, um, and it's going to explore the expansion of globalization since the Second World War. So since 1945, what have human beings been doing in terms of expanding globalization? And then we will also see some growing pains, because not everyone is okay with globalization, like we've been talking about in class. We did some current events on this. We will talk about some people who will challenge globalization. So I would encourage you to watch this video, 200 countries in 200 years. It's only 4 minutes long, and then we'll move on. So, following the Second World War, many countries wanted to secure the global economy. The global economy crashed between the First World War and the Second World War, so much that we call it the Great Depression. And during war, trade is kind of halted. Nobody trades because there's war going on. There's fear that things can be destroyed, things can be stolen, things like that. So people wanted to have control over things. They wanted to have control over their own government, to choose their own government. So you'll learn a word called self-determination. We've talked about it somewhat in our class. That's what they want. They also want to encourage international trade, because international trade is the best way to get the economy working back to normal after the World War II is over. They want protection for smaller countries from larger ones, because larger countries have the ability to bully others in a way that, in terms of economy, that the smaller countries cannot manage. They want to make sure that the oceans are free, because ships carry a lot of goods. They still do now. I've been to San Francisco a few times. I really like it there. And if you look, if you drive or you stand on the Golden Gate Bridge, or if you stand anywhere on the beach, you can actually watch ships coming in from places like Japan, from China, from South Korea, and you can watch ships leaving, going places. So it is still a significant thing. Ocean trade is still huge. I would encourage any of you that have not watched this movie. It's called Captain Phillips. Tom Hanks plays, and it's based on a true story. It's actually a really good movie, and it talks about oceans and the danger of traveling the oceans. It has pirates in it, modern pirates, no peg legs or eye patches, but still, it's a very good movie. And then, so all of these demands, they come together, and all the countries of the world sign on to the creation of the United Nations. So that blue flag there, for those of you that were in the debate session that we had in class before we left, the United Nations is created. And the United Nations is an organization of countries that it protects these sort of things. On slide 4, all the countries in green are a member of the United Nations. That is all countries. You're probably gonna, if you're looking at this really closely, trying to see if I'm lying. Yes, North Korea is on there, and the only country, well, we wouldn't even, it's not even classified as a country. The only gray area there is in North Africa. It's called Western Sahara, but it is administered by Morocco, so I'm still right. Anyways, so other organizations are created. Others international organizations are created. We talked about them a little bit last video with the Bretton Woods conference in 1944. The World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, or the IMF, they are created as well. They are created to help, and the hope is that they're going to create rules which would support international trade, provide loans to countries in financial difficulties. So, countries that are developing would go to these international organizations for loans. They're acting like local banks for people. Um, people go to them, and countries who need extra money to help promote their economy will go to them, and they'll take a loan out and pay it back slowly. So some people argue that this brought peace and prosperity. So it's giving countries who are developing a chance to develop, to um, bring money in, to build up infrastructure, to build up industry, so that they can get off of the support of other countries, and then be fully developed country. Because people argue that providing aid to countries, what it does is it keeps them dependent. So the old saying, "Give a man a fish, you'll feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish, you'll feed him for a lifetime." That's how some people see the IMF and the World Bank supporting developing countries. They're giving them the tools so that they can break out of that developing country title and be a developed country with industry that they can support themselves now. On the flip side, critics argue that there is too much control and influence. To get loans, countries must meet certain political and economic conditions. So they are seeing when these countries are going to the IMF or the World Bank and they're saying, "Can I have a loan?" The IMF and the World Bank are saying, "Sure, you can. Here's a list of our demands, though. These are the things that you have to be making sure that you're following, and then sign your name at the bottom." And some of them, they argue, is they're too much of a demand, and these countries sometimes can't agree to them. And also the loans, the interest. Some people argue it really just keeps the developing countries in a position where they are constantly paying into these loans. They can't really get out of them because the amount of money that they would have, the money that should have been going to making industries is actually going to paying off the loan. So they're arguing it doesn't really help out in the way that it should have. So those are two organizations that were created post World War II that have conflicting ideas from people. So another one that was organized in 1947 is the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, or GATT. It established rules governing trade, especially by removing tariffs and other barriers to trade. So, a tariff is essentially a tax that countries will put on things coming in. So there is this idea called protectionism that it basically says that countries who are protectionist, they protect their own industries. So let's say I'm a country, and I make, I don't know, I make chocolate. That's my number one industry, chocolate. So we make chocolate in my country, and then we export it out. That's all we do. We would, to protect our chocolate industry, to protect it from the outside, we would put up tariffs on chocolate coming in. So let's say another company in my country wants to bring chocolate from, I don't know, New Zealand. I don't know. They would say, okay, any chocolate coming from outside of our country, we're going to charge the importer a certain amount to discourage them from not bringing other stuff in. So GATT is essentially trying to remove these and other barriers as well, so that the idea of free trade amongst the international community, it'll develop far better. So this led in 1995 to the World Trade Organization, which almost all countries in the world currently belong to. So it's an organization that, again, there is a list of there are a list of rules that you follow to be a member of this organization, and essentially it's just to promote free trade. They're trying to lift barriers off of countries and things like that. So on slide number 9, this is the breakup of how the countries look. So the green countries are full members in this organization. The blue are members. They're also represented by the European Union. So the European Union as well. Yellow, they're called observers. So they somewhat follow the rules, but they still have their own restrictions. And then red are non-members. So we're looking at places like Somalia, Eritrea. I'm not sure what that country is. Hold on. Oh, that's South Sudan. That is Turkmenistan. And then North Korea. These are the countries that have not joined on for whatever reason. We also see an informal group that is kind of developed. You kind of hear it in the news if you listen to the news. It's called the G8. So this is not there's not a signing or an official recognition, but it is a group of the eight major industrialized countries: Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, Russia, the United Kingdom, and the United States. So it's not something like the World Trade Organization or the United Nations, but it does play an important role in the global government because it is able to influence global institutions. So essentially you have some of the richest countries in the world basically coming together and chatting about things, how to improve things. So it's not an official organization, but when you have some of the biggest economies and some of the richest nations involved, when they say something, people tend to listen. So it is something to be aware of. Because collectively the G8 has nearly 50% of the vote in the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. So again, not officially recognized, but when this block of countries decides to do something in terms of changes to the World Bank or the IMF, their voice is heard because they do hold almost a majority in those decisions. Now let's jump and focus on something a little bit more North American. The North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, is what it is, the acronym for it. It started as a free trade agreement between Canada and the United States that later expanded to include Mexico. So what it was saying, and it came into force January 1st, 1994. What it was saying is all three countries, they're not going to have restrictions at the borders in terms of tariffs. Stuff's going to go in, stuff's going to come out, and no one's going to be taxed on these sort of things. So most economists would suggest NAFTA had been beneficial to all countries involved, but critics suggest it is harmful and surrenders too much sovereignty. So it really, it had its fans, it had its enemies. Some people argue that it took away a lot of sovereignty or power from the countries and put it in the hands of corporations. So some people will argue that some of the biggest losers of this are the people who impacted the most. And you can watch the video on slide 14. Some people argue that farmers in northern Mexico, they were really hit by this because the price of produce going into the United States, for example, they weren't getting a fair price for what they were producing. That's why they had to sometimes resort to getting money in the not the most legal way. So, for example, the drug trade and being drug mules to bringing in illegal substances from Mexico to the United States. It paid better than having legal work, because finding work in that area would have been difficult as well. For those of you that are interested, I read a book about this. I could tell you what the name of the book is, and then you can have a read for yourself. It was really well done. It was actually written by a Canadian who went to Mexico and stayed there for a few years doing a research study in this field, and she found that a a person in northern Mexico could make the equivalent of a few months' wages in one trip trafficking drugs. So it does show you that the whole war on drugs, it could be a very simple, there could be a very simple solution to this, and it all resorts around having enough resources given to people so that they can have legal jobs where they make enough money to support themselves. So once you're done watching this video, answer question 7 and question 8, and then we'll move on to transnational corporations. So we've talked about these a lot in our class before we left. We kind of even started the class talking about transnational corporations. So these are defined as corporations that operate in 2 or more countries. They're often you'll see them called multinational corporations. Same thing. So large increase of trans or multinational companies because of the liberalization, so the removing or reducing of trade rules. So because there's no more of these rules blocking companies from exporting goods, that's when you start to see them expand their business. I think if you look at places like companies like Amazon, it went from a small company that sold books to now they sell everything, and you can get almost anything off Amazon. Clothing companies are a really good example of this too. So increased profits by centralizing production and selling to a variety of different markets. So when we talked about imperialism and colonialism in the unit in unit 2, countries were looking for more colonies to get more resources, but they were also looking because these places were markets that they could sell their goods to. So you can kind of think of transnational corporations as these imperial Europeans that branch off their industries into other countries, and then they can sell their things there. It is one way that some people would argue how transnational corporations work. So over half from 5 countries. So these 5 countries dominate the transnational corporation industry, so the creation of them: the United States, Japan, France, Britain, and Germany. So if you think about companies that you can get anything around the world, so I think Apple is probably one of the best examples. Anybody in the world can buy an Apple, an iPhone, or an Apple product. It's based in the United States. Clothing industry, Louis Vuitton, for example, very expensive. It's based in France originally, but if you show that brand to anyone in the world, there's a lot of people will know what this brand is. And there are stores all over the world. There is actually a Louis Vuitton store in Banff, for those of you that have been there. And there's like that little mall. It's actually in there. So it shows you the extent that this company has. It's in a small, almost village in Alberta, in the mountains. So it does show you the reach that these companies have. So slide 16, the world's biggest public companies. I can't really read them, but just have a look at that map. It'll show you the concentration of these companies, and then we'll just move on. So the influence of transnational corporations is huge. They have been for a very long time. So they dominate several key industries such as the energy and mineral extraction, important in manufacturing, and in food production. So they have a lot of influence, and some of the influences are extremely like they almost have a country-like power to them. So national governments often compete to attract them. So the influence of these corporations is that some countries will lower their standards, or this idea of race to the bottom, to bring them in. They will say things like, "Oh, um, wages? Yeah, we have very low minimum wage here." Like, I'm not saying in Canada. I'm saying as an example, countries will lower minimum wage. They will overlook health and safety regulations just to get these companies to come in. And some people argue that when these companies come in, they help the country produce and they help the country be prosperous. But then some argue that it is a form of economic slavery because they are subject to these laws, subject to the whims of these companies. And if they don't, the company just gets up and leaves. So they will grant incentives, so even tax breaks, construct infrastructure, adjust policies and laws. So they often compete. Often competitions will occur in different regions of the same country as well. So, so countries, they will even have battles within themselves to bring these corporations in. When they get there, they can become very powerful, and they have the ability to influence um, policy. So, for example, in the 1950s, there is a company in the United States called the United Fruit Company. It's been rebranded now. I forgot what it's called now, but it had a lot of influence in Central America, so much so that it actually owned a almost majority of the land in Guatemala. So in the 1950s, when Guatemala had an election and there was a more um, left thinking or liberal prime president, he kind of took the land back in a legal way, and tried to give it to the farmers of Guatemala. And this company actually got the CIA to get involved in Guatemala and actually overthrew a president and put in a dictator there that was a little bit more favorable to their position. So transnational corporations can take down presidents. And if you're really curious about the story I told you, I will give you more detail. I'll even give you places where you can look in and read it for yourself. It is actually really crazy what happened there. So now we'll focus our attention to this idea of transnationals and poverty. It is possible to reduce poverty by providing investments into countries. So a lot of countries, even Canada, there are people who are homeless. There are people who live below the poverty line. A simple way of doing this is to shift investment and to bring in things that can help people to get above the poverty line. So they often provide directly to a national government through aid and loans. So these companies, they will try to help out. Transnational is often a good way to increase investment in a country. So if a lot of transnational corporations are present in a country, it sometimes helps people to think, oh, that country is starting to stabilize. We can maybe start to look into investing into that country. So they can provide capital, technology, and experience to a country that does not have these resources. So things like jobs, when they bring in these transnational corporations, they set up jobs either in factories or in production or in like a customer service role. So they do provide a incentive, and they do provide an incentive and also a I forgot what I've lost my train of thought. They do help bring jobs in. So 85% of the world's investment into developing countries now comes from transnational corporations. So that is huge. And it is really good to see that there is development that is coming in, and there has been many successful examples. Places like South Korea, Malaysia, Singapore, Taiwan, China, and India. These countries have benefited from this sort of trade and these sort of organizations coming in. If we've talked about China and how a lot of things are made in China, it has helped their economy, and it does provide people with jobs. But like I said, with any sort of thing that we've been talking about, there are people who argue that this is not a good way to keep things going. So many smaller countries have problems attracting investment from the transnationals. They have to give up too much to compete. So this idea of the race to the bottom, they have to give up a lot of control, a lot of things that they wouldn't have to um, if they were a larger country with a lot more power. Sorry, the knocking. That was my daughter. She misses me. So now we'll move to the people who have argued against the transnational or the globalizing effect of these companies. So, the anti-globalization movement is a social movement. Now, when I say anti-globalization movement, it's not just a single thing. It branches off into many different subgroups. So, a social movement that is critical of economic globalization. It's referred to as the global justice movement. So, these are organizations that people will create, and they will argue against things like transnational corporations, the G8, the World Bank, the IMF, these sort of institutions. They see them as keeping people in poverty. So supporters feel multinational corporations have too much influence and are negatively affecting wages, the environment, working conditions, and national sovereignty. So probably one of the most famous that I'm aware of is from Mexico, and it is called the abbreviation is the EZLN, so the Zapatista Army of National Liberation. They are an organization based in southern Mexico that is against the capitalist overtaking of different transnational corporations. They see it as a negative in terms of wages, environment, and indigenous sovereignty over the land. So if you're interested, it is a very interesting organization, and I can give you some resources. I'll even put a video in the description if I can find one. If you're curious about this, I can recommend another book that I've read related to anti-globalization movements. And in this book, it even brings up Alberta. We have in Alberta a very famous, what is known as an eco-terrorist. So he is a person, I forget his name, but he has a very iconic name, very cool. He was actually, he would do acts of terrorism against oil companies in Alberta. So if you're curious, I'll give you the name of that book as well. So let's move on though. So slide 24, Talisman Energy, a Canadian transnational. So this is an energy producer, oil and natural gas. So actively exploring the world for energy reserves. Focuses in Western Canada and the North Sea. So we were just talking about oil companies and transnational. So this is a Canadian feel to it. For some people, it is a source of income. It's a source of revenue. It is something that is keeping us as a country bringing in resource and jobs and stuff like that. For other people, it is not so much. So it's criticized for supporting the Sudanese government because it wanted to develop oil reserves in the Sudan. The Sudanese government is accused of genocidal acts against ethnic minorities. So we see this in a lot of cases where companies will come in and they will support governments that may not be the most nicest in terms of human rights, just to secure. They'll secure things for themselves. So there's pressure from non-government organizations, NGOs, to force Talisman to sell its Sudanese operations. Um, so there was some anti globalization organizations that were really against this, and when they heard that this was going on, they really pressured um, this company to stop what it was doing. So the Talisman was acquired by Repsol, a Spanish global energy company, in 2015. Um, so the situation, it changes based on the pressure from these sort of organizations. Um, so we have to be aware of this. That there are groups that will pressure um, these organizations into um, moving because they see the involvement of transnational corporations as a negative sometimes. So we talked about the positives, what they bring in, but we also have to focus on the negatives as well. If you're really interested in this too, there is a diamond, one of the largest diamond companies in the world. I think it's called De Boers Diamond. It's a South African company. They have been linked to these ideas of blood diamonds. So, getting involved in war and civil war in Africa for the sake of revenue. So, if you're interested in that, into that too. It's also really fascinating. So, but let's move on. How do communication technologies contribute to expanding globalization? So, when we talked about historical globalization, um, ships that could travel across the ocean was an example of how they could expand globalization. The Industrial Revolution was a way that we could expand globalization because we were producing more things and much faster. So now communication technology is another step that will project us into the future. So globalization only possible because of the ability to communicate across the planet quickly. If it took 3 months or longer for something to be shipped through Amazon, Amazon wouldn't exist because competition says if I can do it faster, your company's not going to survive. So our ability to communicate around the world is what is helping expand globalization. Places where access to communication Places where access to communication have a difficult time participating in globalization. So we find that places that aren't really well connected, they aren't really fully in this web of globalization. So you do see the effects of that as well. The idea of e-commerce, so electronic commerce, allows consumers to purchase goods without being limited to going to the store. So right now is an excellent example, and it drastically increased. It's a drastically increasing form of trade. So, for example, the world you live in now, eBay, Amazon. Talk about Amazon a lot today. These places are you can buy things that and you don't need to physically be there. We see it nowadays too. For those of you who go to the grocery store, there are now a lot of grocery stores have things where you can order groceries and then go there and then they bring them out to you. So it is changing the way that we do things. However, like we talked about, if you have no connection to this communication web, it limits your access to technology. So there's this developed versus developing sort of thing. The developed countries are a part of this web and they can develop faster. Those who are not kind of they develop at a much slower rate, and then they are forced to go down different avenues. So developing countries, they lack the infrastructure to participate. So sometimes the access is available, but national governments wish to limit the access to the internet. So, for example, China. So there are countries who they don't have that sort of connection with, like, just physically the connection of the internet to all aspects of their country. There are countries like, say, China, who don't want their people to have that sort of access. So if you go to China, a lot of sites are blocked because the Chinese government is really trying its best to restrict that. So that is it for today. Kind of a lengthy video as well, but it's okay. It's been a while. So again, if you have any questions or concerns about anything, please either leave a comment or email me. So there was a lot of red words there, so please make sure that you are keeping up with your the dictionary portion as well. A lot of you have sent me your booklets through either writing them on Google Docs or taking photos, which is fantastic. But you forgot the dictionary. So don't forget the dictionary. That is a part of this as well. Besides that, that's it for today. Enjoy your weekend. Stay safe. Stay warm because it's snowing again. And I will see you on Monday.